I don't know, but I'd rather take my chances with the dead, whatever the hell they are, than the still very alive monsters that want us for breakfast back in the Little Chaff, Owen said. Owen tried to wake Kalina, who, after coming to, was shocked to see where she was. You went upstairs. What was the one thing I asked you not to do? The one thing, Kalina said. Your friend downstairs was going to make us walk outside into those monsters. What would you have us do? Owen replied. He's no friend of mine, Kalina said bitterly. As she looked back the way, she continued. He's not following us. He'll have sent for help. We have to move quickly. Up ahead there's a city. It's not as advanced as mine, but it does have protection. We can reach it if we're careful. She didn't have time to explain anything else. As they made their way through the crucified corpses, to their horror, the travellers could see that not all of them were dead. Some of the demons were still writhing on their crosses. In fact, one dripped a hideous green, acidic slime from its mouth on the younger gangster's shoulders, which burned right the way through his clothes and left a very nasty wound. Another unfortunate creature on one of the crosses started to speak. You think this war is over? It'll take more than this to kill me. Every drop of blood I spill here will be repaid tenfold, but not by me. He laughed bitterly. By what I was protecting you all from. Kalina responded by simply spitting on him, much to the others, including even the gangster's shock. Believe me, I wouldn't have helped hammer those nails in if I thought you'd die instantly. I hope you live a long, long time up there, she said, before walking away slowly. Owen remained behind after all the others had walked away, feeling he should try and help this strange creature, and all the others if he could, even if, from the looks of things, most of them would kill him. Kalina soon returned and started to pull Owen away. You really did this to him? Owen asked, not wanting it to be true. He quite liked Kalina, at least up until now. Granted, the fact that she was a she was normally enough. Yes, and I'd do it again, 100 times over. How could you? And why are you helping us if that's the case? You didn't kill my son, Kalina said, almost with tears in her eyes, whilst the demon laughed. As if one boy's life matters. You'd have called me a hero, or at least turned a blind eye if your people had been spared the sacrifice. Kalina, however, didn't let him get to her and walked away through the other crosses. She didn't even check on Owen, but he soon followed her, though not before looking into the demon's eyes one last time, almost hoping it would take control of him to make him free it. Once they reached the end of the graveyard, below was a valley which ended in a forest. This valley was filled with gigantic dinosaurian creatures, including several crystallosaurs, as well as many duck-billed dinosaurs and gigantic sauropod-like dinosaurs. Again, however, they were unlike any dinosaur Owen and Megan had ever seen. Granted, they hadn't seen any dinosaurs in the flesh before tonight, but still, even they could tell these weren't quite the way that the great beasts had always been depicted in films and media. Megan refused to go another step through the dinosaurs up ahead, at least until Kalina told her what the hell was going on and what this strange place was. Kalina explained as best she could. She told them all about the worlds within worlds concept, and that this place was called Karsca. There were 17 cities on Karsca, with hers known as Tamska existing in the centre and being the largest and most powerful, though, in spite of this, it did not impose its will on the others. At least not officially. Most of the cities and settlements functioned on their own. She still didn't explain anything else about the demon on the cross, other than that it had wronged her people. Kalina explained that about 70 years or so ago, during World War II, one of the witches of Sharpeville used magic to try and steal the portal to Karsca in the hopes of harnessing the mini-world's untouched magics and using them as a weapon against the Nazis and their vampire allies. One of the 2 portals to Karsca was originally located deep within the City of Caves near Nottingham. The other is located high on the second tower of the Golden Gate Bridge. Apparently, the bridge had been constructed in the first place, not just to link San Francisco and Bryn Country, but for the tower to serve as a conductor for the powerful magics to block the portal. Prior to the bridge's construction, the area was often rife with winged monsters and creatures emerging from Karsca. The witches of Sharpeville, meanwhile, working with an even greater resource of magic, pulled from all over the world, literally ripped the portal away from the Nottingham Caves and trapped it near Valor Forest instead. Sharpeville's subsequent attempts to harness Karsca's power led to a clash with its cities, who temporarily united against their common enemies. After a year of fighting, the cities eventually not only agreed to a truce, but also to help Sharpeville win the war, seeing the Nazis as a potential threat to them as well. Once the war was over, the cities then signed a peace treaty with the people of Sharpeville not to interfere in each other's affairs, and occasionally help each other out to deal with any more mutual threats like the Nazis. Of course, the treaty was broken many times by both sides, in all fairness, but eventually, in 1965, Tamska was able to cast a spell over the gateway which shielded it. The shield would prevent any life form that it deemed a threat to Karsca, or of no potential use, from entering. It also took on the form of a little chef, meanwhile, as those were common back then on roadsides, and it wanted to serve as a neutral ground for any outsiders who became lost in this unfortunate place, though more to deprive the people of Sharpeville of any possible recruitments or food than any moral reasons, as well as possibly recruit help from the outside world, while still maintaining a neutral stance. The people of Karsca could say those who stumbled into the little chef were not captured per se, and could leave if they wanted, but if they stumbled through its portal contained upstairs, then those in Karsca could do what they wanted with them, as they were now on their grounds. In many ways, it was as much a filter as a shield to make sure that the right people entered Karsca. The portal was also manned by people from Tamska, who were teleported to and from it, and given incredible power by the portal itself. Sadly, however, their powers only lasted as long as they were in the portal or little chef, meaning Kalina was now powerless back in her home world. Kalina also explained that the shield had other complications, as it suppressed the portal's power by filtering it, unlike the magics over the Golden Gate Bridge, which simply covered the portal. This eventually led to fractures of the portal appearing throughout England in the 80s. At least 3 of these fractures became permanent portals to Karsca, and were all covered up by Tamska with similar shields, which were a lot more sophisticated, so as not to create more splinters. Another of these shields also took on the form of a little chef, which, ironically, became an archaic disguise as the chain closed down. Another, meanwhile, took on the form of a pub known as the Vulcan, whilst the final took on the form of a pub named the Falcon. Unlike the little chef, neither of these pubs attempted to blend in, and were somewhat old-fashioned in both design Both of these portals were contained within the Isle of Wight, whilst the second little chef existed within the Midlands. The actual portal was kept in different locations within each building. In the second little chef, it existed within the toilets, whilst in the Vulcan, the back garden led to the portal, whilst finally the cellar of the Falcon led to Karsca. These three other shields would often simply influence ordinary people who wouldn't be of use to them to pass by, to the point that most people in the local area didn't even know they existed. A few of the people they allowed to enter over the years, meanwhile, unlike Owen and the others, hadn't taken the bait and wisely left before stumbling through the portals. If they did choose to leave, the portal would then shield itself from them from then on to make sure that they didn't alert the authorities. In spite of this, however, myths and stories about vanishing pubs on the Isle of Wight became part of the local folklore, though luckily for Karsca, very few took them seriously. Whilst the people of Tamska did their best to ensure that there were no more splinters from the original shield, every now and again some small portals would still open up as a result, usually near or within Vela Forest, though only for a few minutes at a time. Sometimes certain creatures could still come through in that time, like the Crystallosaurus that attacked them in the woods earlier. Those who worked within the Little Chef often did their best to ensure these portals were closed instantly, but now and again there were small mistakes. The demon graveyard finally was created by Tamska as a warning to any creature from Karsca that tried to attack their force field. Overall, despite its attempt to remain closed off, Karsca ironically now had more portals to the Earth than any other mini-world. It is believed that the same kind of magic that created these little chefs were later, after 2 more centuries of refinement, used by Tamska to seal all of the worlds within worlds off from the outside world. Like many worlds within worlds, Karsca was also inhabited by dinosaurs who had crossed over from our world before their extinction 66 million years ago. These dinosaurs, as a result of a further 66 million years of evolution, as well as competition from the mammals and humans who would later cross over, and the magics from warlocks, witches and demons that altered the land and its creatures, were completely new and distinct species not found elsewhere. Incidentally, the witches of Sharpeville were not the first people to discover Karsca. Leaving aside the early humans who entered and whose descendants would form the various civilizations, the elites of English and later British society, such as the royals, were aware of its existence for many centuries too. Queen Victoria used to go hunting for dinosaurs, and even had a stuffed Crystallosaurus in her trophy collection kept below Buckingham Palace, which was used as the basis for the famous Crystal Palace dinosaurs models. The Crystal Palace dinosaurs were infamously built when mankind was first learning about these great beasts, and the artist, who was friends with Victoria, believed that the dinosaur he was supposed to build, Iguanodon, must have resembled or been a forebear of Victoria's beast. Ironically, the Crystallosaurus, as it was later named in the modern world, was actually a descendant of the hadrosaurs that had adopted a completely 4-legged stance and more overt defences, as well as an omnivorous diet. Sadly for Victoria, her husband Prince Albert was killed by a dinosaur on another hunt in 1861. He was devoured by a species of meat-eating dinosaur known as the Astroposaurus rex, Lightning Lizard King. This creature was one of the many descendants of the Tyrannosaurus rex in Karsca. The official story was simply that Albert was overworked and suffered from ill health, but his death sadly undermined relations between the monarchy and Tamska, though there would still be other hunting trips and expeditions from later monarchs, which helped catalogue the dinosaur species. Meanwhile, the magic of Karsca translated the languages of the people of Karsca and those of the outside world to each other, which led to the likes of Owen and Megan and the others referring to these new breeds of dinosaur by the names other outsiders had given them before without even knowing them. Finally, Kalina explained that just beyond the Valley of the Dinosaurs was another city, a place known as Ineka, which, though a primitive city, was completely independent, at least from her home, so she wouldn't have to face persecution for her betrayal. Sadly, however, they'd have to make their way through many dinosaurs in the process. Still, for now, it was their only hope. The two gangsters Owen had rescued from the vampires had kept quiet for this entire time. Obviously, nobody knew why they were here. Mind you, neither Megan nor Owen had revealed why they were here either. At least for now, it didn't seem to matter to Owen and Megan. The gangsters still planned to kill them as soon as it was convenient, but for now, even they knew there was safety in numbers. The travellers made their way through the dinosaurs, careful to keep out of sight from the crystallosaurs, who had a taste for human meat, though the sauropods soon proved to be a bigger danger. These creatures were known as Linothosaurus, armour-plated reptiles. Despite their incredible size of over 80 feet in length and 50 tons in weight, their skin was still reinforced, like that of an ankylosaurus. They also had 2 horns growing backwards from the top of their heads and a large club at the end of the tails with spikes on either end. Again, why such giant creatures would still need such elaborate defences was something that troubled the newcomers to this strange land. One of the sauropods soon spotted Megan when she unintentionally got near its child. These beasts were extremely territorial, not surprising given the nature of the valley. The dinosaur then tried to crush Megan under its enormous 3-toed, clawed feet in response, with the witch only narrowly escaping, being squashed like a bug. Unfortunately, the dinosaur also got between Megan and the others. Kalina, along with, ironically, the 2 Owen rescued, simply headed in the other direction, despite Owen's protests, as the dinosaur began to corner the aspiring witch. Owen begged Noel to use his whistle, but he didn't want to in case it caused a stampede. Still, as the sauropod reared on its back legs to crush Megan, Noel had no choice, and whistled as loud as he could. The sauropod did stumble backwards, allowing Megan to run past the giant reptile. Unfortunately, as the dinosaur started to thrash around, with its club tail only narrowly missing Megan, the other dinosaurs nearby also began to panic, causing a commotion, just like the Shadmock feared. Worse, whilst Noel's whistle only hurt the one dinosaur, the others throughout the valley could still hear it, and soon they too began to panic, scream, and bump into each other. Within a minute, the animals started to flee, leading to a stampede. Owen pulled Megan away just in the nick of time from a Linothosaurus, with the 2 hiding behind a nearby fallen tree that the dinosaurs tried to avoid. Once the great reptiles fled, Megan and Owen met up with the others who had similarly only barely managed to find hiding places. Megan was furious with Kalina for leaving her, but Owen soon shut her up by pointing out she left the former waitress back in the Little Chef. As they moved deeper into the valley, they spotted several Stegosaurus-like dinosaurs, more sauropods in the distance, and several pterosaurs above. The most gruesome sight they witnessed was what looked like a large, almost reptilian monkey chasing a pterosaur along the ground and then following it up a tree before catching it. The reptilian ape-like creature then broke the pterosaur's neck and twisted its head off with its powerful forearms. The ape-like creature was actually a dinosaur. It was a descendant of the Spinosaurus family, known as Pithecosaurus, ape lizard. The creature had forearms longer than its hind legs and walked around like an ape. Its short, stocky tail and a short crocodilian-like head were among the only telltale signs of its Spinosaurian ancestry. Finally, it also possessed 3 long claws on its hands and an opposable thumb. The Pithecosaurus was actually a sub-adult. They could grow to over 40 feet in length and were among the most dangerous predators in the area. Luckily, Owen and the others didn't have any encounters with the adults, but as the day became night, they would soon have a run-in with another apex predator, Carnotaurus Gigantis. This animal grew to over 70 feet long, stood over 30 feet tall, and weighed in at over 18 tons. It was the direct descendant of the Carnotaurus, and its body plan was almost identical to that of its ancestor, with the only difference being it was over 3 times its size. In spite of this, however, the animal was still fast, and suddenly surprised the travellers as they were briefly taking a break. Kalina had advised against it, but the others, particularly Owen, wanted a rest. He wasn't used to being on his feet this long. The dinosaur came bursting out of the darkness of the forest behind them before Noel could even whistle. Sadly, one of the 2 gangsters, the younger one, wasn't fast enough, and the Carnotaurus impaled him on one of its horns. It missed a vital organ, however, and he was left alive, writhing in pain on its horn as the animal reared its head. His friend instantly abandoned him and the others, running as fast as he could, blindly through the trees. The dinosaur, meanwhile, shook its head until it eventually sent the younger gangster flying across the forest. Once again, Owen foolishly ran to try and help him, but the Carnotaurus soon cornered both of them. Owen felt like running away, and, to be honest, he only didn't because he knew he wouldn't make it 2 feet. Both men were frozen in horror as the dinosaur's massive head came bearing down on top of them. The horns above its eyes made it look almost demonic, and when it opened its jaws and roared in their faces, they were splattered with the blood and even a few chunks of its previous victims. Noel, Megan, and Kalina, seemingly both wanting to make up for their past actions, came to the rescue. Noel distracted it with his whistle, whilst Kalina threw a large ball of mud from the earth straight into the dinosaur's eye, which was enough to at least distract it, whilst finally Megan helped Owen up and even helped to carry the wounded gangster too. The Carnotaurus, however, wasn't fooled and swung its tail backwards, knocking Kalina and Noel several feet in the air. The dinosaur then turned to face the others and chased them. Megan and Owen, whilst carrying the gangster, tried to hide behind a tree, only for the Carnotaurus to nearly crush them under it when it charged into the tree like a giant reptilian bull. Noel again tried to use his whistle, but at first it didn't even seem to bother the Carnotaurus. It was so consumed with bloodlust it continued to chase them. Noel pushed harder until the dinosaur went feral. Again it brought its tail down, which separated Owen from Megan and the gangster. A further strike sent Owen flying about 20 feet through the air, whilst Megan was forced to flee ahead of the beast to the others. The Carnotaurus then chased Noel, who had worn himself down, Megan, who was still carrying the other gangster, and Kalina, all of whom fled in the other direction from Owen. The dinosaur very nearly caught up to them, but one final use of the Shadmock's whistle temporarily stunned the dinosaur, enough for them to reach a small cave that was a dead end on the other side. The Carnotaurus still didn't give up, however. It started to poke its snout through the entrance to the cave, which was just big enough to fit and even partly open its jaws, which were very nearly clamped down on Megan's feet. She and the others were forced to push themselves right back against the wall until they almost couldn't move any further. After a few minutes, the dinosaur pulled back and then started to ram its head into the cave, even managing to stab its horns through the cave wall. One horn came within a millimetre of Noel's eye. The Carnotaurus continued to ram its horns through the wall several more times until it eventually impaled Kalina through the stomach. Meanwhile, across the other end of the forest, Owen was awoken by the sound of a Stegosaurus's foot coming down right next to his head. Again, much like the Carnotaurus, the Stegosaurus was a lot larger than its Jurassic era counterpart at over 60 feet long. As soon as Owen awoke, he ran in the opposite direction. Ironically, the Stegosaur was a gentle creature and wouldn't have harmed him, at least not intentionally. Granted, there are more pleasant ways to be woken up than a dinosaur almost standing on your head. The Stegosaurus had ironically been what the Carnotaurus was chasing the entire time, but it got sidetracked after picking up the scent of some humans. The meat-eating dinosaurs and the humans were natural rivals, as both were apex predators. In the constant battle for survival in Karsca between both species, the dinosaurs were evidently winning as they were more widespread throughout the continent, but still the humans had killed large swathes of their numbers, destroyed entire ecosystems, and driven them from certain areas. Naturally, most large carnivores, and even some herbivores, instinctively attacked any humans they saw as a result. When the Stegosaurus unknowingly got nearer, the Carnotaurus turned its attention back to the herbivore. They may have been intelligent killers in some respects, but at the end of the day, they were still slave to their instincts like most beasts, and a creature that size was constantly on the lookout for more food. It soon crept up on the Stegosaurus that was distracted with some ferns and bit the animal's tail, its main weapon. The theropod then dragged the Stegosaurus across the forest floor before stabbing its horns into the animal's side, knocking the herbivore over. The Carnotaurus finally clamped its jaws around the Stegosaurus's skull, crushing it instantly. Megan had been forced to watch the gruesome spectacle from the cave, but at the very least, the dinosaur wouldn't give them any more trouble, as long as they didn't draw its attention again. Sadly, Kalina was in no position to go. In fact, she wasn't going to last much longer, and neither was the other gangster, and Noel sat with both of them. Maybe it was the tiny grain of empathy she had left, or maybe she didn't want to face these woods alone, but Megan racked through her memories and worked harder than she had ever done in terms of trying to conjure a spell from memory, with which she was able to partially heal over both stab wounds. Neither Kalina or the gangster completely recovered, and Megan and Noel still had to help them up, but at least Megan had saved their lives. Owen, meanwhile, had become lost in the dark and sprawling woods ahead. He was too afraid to even call out as the sound of more dinosaurs rang in his ears. Eventually, however, he stumbled upon a castle in the distance. It sat atop a hill right next to a swamp. There was a fully grown Pithecosaurus running around the hill, but Owen's attention was drawn more to the strange, flashing lights within the castle. Before he could even attempt to figure out what was going on in there, the older gangster grabbed him from behind. He figured this was the perfect chance to pick off one of his intended targets. Owen struggled, but he was no match for the gangster's strength. This obviously wasn't the first person he had killed. Owen pushed as hard as he could, however, and the two eventually both went stumbling back onto the forest floor, after which Owen barely managed to struggle free. "Odd way of saying thank you," Owen said as he tried to get his breath back. "If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be in this miserable place at all. You and that witch couldn't just get picked off by one of the monsters on that road, could you?" the gangster said angrily. Even Owen realised what he really was now, and ran as fast as he could. Now he had no problem shouting for help. If anything, he hoped maybe one of the dinosaurs could pick off the gangster. Sure enough, he soon attracted the attention of a dinosaur, a sub-adult Carnotaurus. It was only about 10 feet long and 5 feet high, but it was still more than capable of overpowering and killing even the largest human. The animal, however, at first almost seemed quite playful. It certainly didn't seem to want to hurt Owen, though he kept his distance. When the gangster arrived, he also froze at the sight of the dinosaur, with Owen then trying to take his chance and flee. The gangster, however, jumped him and pinned Owen to the ground before trying to snap his neck. The scuffle scared the young dinosaur, and it responded by charging at the gangster with its horns, which was enough to break his ribs and send him flying. When he tried to get back up, only to fall and start coughing blood, the Carnotaurus, that had suddenly become a lot more bold, charged at him and bit into his leg. Owen could hear the bones in the gangster's foot break as the dinosaur clamped down harder. The gangster kicked it in the face several times, and though he impaled his foot on one of its horns in the process, he was still able to push the creature back. The dinosaur, however, did not give up, and slowly backed him against a tree. The gangster actually had the nerve to call out to Owen for help, but he wasn't fooled this time. Ironically, a part of Owen still wanted to save him, but he wasn't willing to face a dangerous predator for a man who'd just tried to break his neck, and so Owen walked away as the gangster screamed and pleaded with and eventually cursed Owen. The Carnotaurus then attacked whilst the gangster was distracted and bit onto the same foot again, though this time it bit hard enough to rip his entire foot off. The dinosaur then reached for its victim's stomach and tore it open before he could even raise his hands in a feeble attempt to fight it off. The Carnotaurus literally pulled at least part of the gangster's intestines out and used them to drag him a few feet across the forest floor with its jaws before it tore a large section of them out. Finally, the beast put its clawed foot over his mangled stomach, which it pushed down on, causing more blood and guts to overflow. The gangster couldn't even scream or breathe. His throat was filled with blood, though he managed, in a final act of defiance, to spit some of the overflowing blood back in the dinosaur's face before it delivered a merciful, final bite to his skull. Owen had watched the gruesome spectacle from afar. As much as he wanted to, he couldn't look away until it was over. Again, he was tempted to interfere, but he knew that there was nothing he could have done anyway, and quickly got out of there as fast as he could to avoid being next. He soon bumped into another adult Carnotaurus. This was a different specimen to the one that had attacked earlier. Clearly, these three dinosaurs were a family unit out hunting. Fortunately for Owen, the second adult didn't notice him, as it already had a kill in its jaws. A young duck-billed dinosaur that had strayed too far from the herd and been pounced on by this giant. Unlike the gangster, at least, the young dinosaur had met a quick end with one bite to its back, killing it almost instantly. Owen waited for the giant to pass before making his way through the woods, eventually meeting up with his comrades, and naturally, the first thing he did was warn them about the other gangster. "I told you we should have left them to die, and here you had me waste my skills on this lowlife," Megan said, as she threw the gangster she was still holding up back onto the ground, which caused at least part of his wound to open again. "Please, it's not like that. We were just wanting to know what you were doing in Sharpeville," he tried to claim as he clutched his wound in pain. "What would you have done if we'd not wanted to share that information? A little gentle slap on the wrist. If it wasn't for one of those dinosaurs, your friend would have broken my neck," Owen said. Is he dead?" the younger gangster asked. Owen didn't answer. He didn't want to go over the gruesome sight again. The younger gangster was almost relieved. He hated his comrade, whose name was George, who had always been arrogant, sadistic, cruel, and bitter that he had been somewhat usurped among the Armstrongs for vampires and demons. He often tried to prove himself by inflicting particularly gruesome deaths on his victims. Ironically, by simply snapping Owen's neck, he was, in a way, showing him gratitude for saving his life. If Owen had known the full extent of the horrors he had carried out, meanwhile, he'd have cheered the Carnotaurus on. The younger gangster, whose name was Craig, meanwhile, begged them not to throw him to the dinosaurs, stating that if they let him go, he could tell the Armstrongs that they were dead. Megan wasn't convinced, but once again, Owen, foolishly, having seen what happened to George, believed that he couldn't allow anyone to go through that again, and helped Craig up. He made it clear that the first sign of treachery, and he would abandon him. The four eventually made their way to the gates of Ineka. Suddenly, several gigantic black spiritual creatures with bright red eyes began to appear at the gates. They were actually demons that the people had enslaved to serve as guard dogs for the city. Fortunately, Kalina knew the spell to make them temporarily disappear. Only the people of her city knew it. As soon as the demons vanished, several guards emerged from the gates holding swords. Kalina explained to them what was going on and how they all simply wanted to take refuge in Ineka. The guards said they would let them stay, but only if they agreed to the condition for all newcomers. Kalina agreed before the others could even ask, and they were all soon led through the gates. The city was absolutely beautiful. It was a strange mixture of different eras. Unlike other cities, it seems the people of Ineka had a greater appreciation for the outside world, which made sense in a way as their city was the closest to the gateway. All of the people of Karsca were allowed to leave whenever they wanted, though they had to be cleared by those at the gateway first. Some left on official business to make sure there were no threats to the world at large. Some even relocated, whilst others simply enjoyed going on holidays. On one hand, the housing of this city had a very 1950s aesthetic to it, whilst the larger buildings had an Art Deco, almost futuristic feel. The pubs and cafes, meanwhile, looked as though they came from the Middle Ages. The streets, on the other hand, were Victorian, whilst the cars had more of a 1940s feel. Finally, the clothes and fashion looked like they came from the 1960s. There were also dinosaurs running around too, all domesticated of course. People had as pets small proteroceratops-like dinosaurs, as well as some small feathered velociraptor-like dinosaurs on leashes. The 5 travellers were taken to a detention centre where Noel, Megan, Owen and Craig learned that Kalina had somewhat misled them. In order to be accepted as citizens of Ineka, people had to complete 1 year of military service. Kalina was more than prepared for this. She had already served in her own city's military for a few years, and she knew that if she went back home now, after helping people enter Karsca, and condemn her soul to imprisonment within the blue fog, at least this way, even if she died on duty, her soul would be free. The others, however, were less than thrilled with Kalina, but in all honesty, she didn't care. She felt they owed her, considering they were the ones who put her in hot water with her people anyway. They spent a few weeks in detainment, largely isolated, which was just as well given the other outlaws and even demons from across Karsca that had sought refuge in Ineka. Finally, however, after a fortnight, Owen, Kalina, Megan, Craig and Noel were brought together again, along with the other outlaws, to be given their first mission. Over the next few years, this strange world within a world would become their new home and help change them all for the better in ways they couldn't imagine, but those are stories for another time.